Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome to today's weekend reflections on this Saturday, the 19th of October, 2024. I hope you are well wherever you are tuning into this from. Today, I would like to read to you a little bit from this book because a lot of people have asked me, like, how long has Islam been in Britain? Is Islam a new religion to Britain? Well, this book is quite illuminating in this respect because this book is called Islam in Britain, 1558 to 1685, written by Nabil Maher, published by Cambridge University Press in 1998. Now, I'll just read a couple of little bit separate bits from chapter one first, because I'm not going to read all of this, but just to give you an idea. It starts on chapter one, Turning Turk, Conversion to Islam in English Writings. A year before the Turkey Company's first charter was granted, in September 1581, the Ottoman Sultan sent to Queen Elizabeth, that's Queen Elizabeth I, the terms on which he would permit English traders to conduct a commercial activity within his dominions. In the interpretation of the letters or privilege of the most mighty and Musulman-like emperor Sultan Murad Khan, granted at the request of Elizabeth by the grace of the most mighty God, 1580, which was later published by Sultan Murad III, assured the Queen of his cooperation and of the release of all Britons who had been taken prisoners and detained in captivity in Turkey and North Africa. But then the Sultan added, should Muslims capture and sell a slave, if the party shall be found to be English and shall receive the holy religion, then let him freely be discharged. But if he will remain a Christian, let him then be restored to the Englishmen. There was an official Ottoman position regarding the status of Englishmen who deserted their faith and became Muslims. The Queen had to concede that some of her subjects would convert to Islam and renounce their allegiance to England and become subjects of the Sultan. But the interesting thing here is if they remained Christians and remained English, they would be restored to the Englishmen. So as soon as it was possible, I mean, in those days you had to commission a ship. It wasn't as simply as sticking someone on an aircraft. So it was when the next ship went to England, then those Englishmen would be put on that ship to be returned to England. However, those Englishmen were also given a choice that if they wished to become Muslims, then they would be immediately set free and the Sultan would leave them alone. They would have nothing else to worry about. So some of them just chose to become Muslims. Others were restored to England. Now, skipping a bit further in this book, it describes how various kinds of people became Muslims. You know, some of them were people who came off ships, some of them were pirates, some of them were, just people who were in these places and became Muslims. So there's various different accounts of how people became Muslims. But this is interesting here as well. Renaissance travelers in the Levant is the area around today's Palestine, Israel, Lebanon, that region, confirmed this toleration and reported on the amicable interaction of religious communities and on how Muslims, Jews, and Christians shared their festivities with each other. So, i.e., Eid and Christmas and Rosh Hashanah, these festivals of the various religions, they shared with each other. Thomas Coryat observed how often spectators were as well Christians as Turks, and so did Rakut, who could not but praise Muslim toleration of Christians, including Muslim respect for the Christian clergy. Many accounts by captives in North Africa speak of disrespect with which priests received from their captors the permission they were granted to celebrate their religious feasts and the presents they were given to decorate their churches. In Smyrna, Turks often dropped in at Christian churches, while others enjoyed listening to children reciting their catechism. At the end of the 17th century, French traveler Jean Dumont, the Sieur Dumont, 1667 to 1727, noted that Muslims venerated certain Christian saints, and that on a few occasions Turks and Christians joined together in some rites of devotion. At the law court in which he visited in Egypt, Verriard saw copies of the Old and New Testament and a Quran that were used to swear Jews, Christians, and Mohammedans, each according to their religion. Christians and Jews were established communities within the Muslim Empire. So this was from visitors to the region that they realized that there was a respect between Jews and Christians and Muslims, which maybe it was not so widely known back home here in the UK. But when travelers visited the Ottoman Empire, they noticed these things. And now I want to read this because this is more concise, this section. British converts to Islam. The above four categories constitute the templates which 16th and 17th century English, Scottish, and continental writers used to explain the motives of Christian conversion to Islam. Significantly, the evidence about actual British converts to Islam in government documents and other sources confirms these categories. The following survey of British converts to Islam show the extent of conversion in the period under study. The first English convert to Islam, whose name survives in an English source, the voyage made to Tripoli, 1583, was a servant, a son of a yeoman of our Queen's Guard. His name was John Nelson. Henceforth, in travel literature, converts always appear, especially when ordered by their captors to convert their compatriots to Islam, as was the case with Nelson. In the mid-1580s, and as a result of tensions with Spain and subsequent decline of trade with Germany, English ships ventured into the Mediterranean to compete for Venetian and Turkish trade. Bear in mind, back at this time, there was a lot of trade going on within the Mediterranean between the Turks, the Venetians, also the Spanish, and they were all trying to control this area because that's where trade came. And that's also where trade came from the east, through the Silk Road. Trade came through from China, through Central Asia, through to Turkey. And that was the gateway to this trade until, the British and the European powers found other ways to send ships to places like Indonesia and India and those countries, and also to China, so that they could avoid the Silk Route. This trade was coming through the Mediterranean. So also this is why it's talking about captives and battles and things, because there was a competition between the Spanish and the Turks, and the Venetians, who were more traders than anything, but there was a competition with trade as well there. And then also the English and the Spanish at that time were adversaries for the most part. I mean, the Spanish literally sent an armada to England in order to conquer the country, which was unsuccessful, but they tried. So the English actually allied with the Ottomans. And the English were in alliance with the Ottomans right through till probably the early 19th century, until it became unfeasible. So this is the sort of context of what I'm reading here. In the mid-1580s, and as a result of tensions with Spain and the subsequent decline of trade with Germany, English ships ventured into the Mediterranean to compete for Venetian and Turkish trade. Diverse ships were captured by North African pirates and divers, sailors were forced to turn Turk. In April 1585, William Harborne, the first English ambassador to Istanbul, wrote to Sir Francis Walsingham, the Queen's secretary, about Hassan, king of Algiers, his renegades taking our ships. This reference to an English renegade in high office recalls Le Cade Zafar, renegade Anglais, who had been mentioned by Diego de Hado in 1581. In 1591, John Sanderson visited Istanbul and observed that many Englishmen, old and young, have my remembrance turned Turks, i.e., they became Muslims. As Benjamin Bishop, George Butler, John Ambrose, and others. H.R. mentioned in 1593 in News from the Levant Seas, an Englishman turned Turk in some favor with the King of Algiers. When Thomas Dallam went to Istanbul in 1599 with a gift of a musical organ to the Sultan from the Levant Company, he met in Algiers with a large number of renegade Christians. Mostly are Spaniards, Italians, and some other lands adjoining. Later in Istanbul, he met a Muslim who was a Cornish man born. In the same year, one Albert True, an English renegade, was captured by a Venetian ship, and in 1609, George Wilkins described an Englishman who forsook Christ to follow Muhammad, and from a Christian turned Moor, i.e. became Muslim. Sir Henry Middleton referred in 1612 to the youth of Mr. Pemberton's who had converted to Islam, and Lithgow mentioned an English renegade named Wolston, whom he met in Crete, and it was an Englishman who became a famous courtier, Shafar, in 1630. Sometime after 1610, 46 Britons who had converted to Islam were captured at sea, while on November 1616, it was reported to the East India Company that a servant had capitulated his soul to the devil by turning an accursed Mohammedan. So you see, at that time, there was still quite a lot of prejudice towards Muslims. Otherwise, nobody today, or very few people today, would say the cursed Mohammedan. But you know, this shows it's still recorded the fact that the person became Muslim. In 1619, the author of the Relations of the Christianity of Africa, and especially of Barbary and Algiers, published by Purchas, noticed that between 1609 and 1619, the highest number of renegades came from Lower Germany, 857 renegades, so 857 Germans who converted to Islam, followed by 300 from England. In 1622, Sir Thomas Roe, an English ambassador to Istanbul, reported that 2 Englishmen had converted to Islam by force and frailty. In the same year, John Rawlins included in the famous and wonderful recovery of a ship of Bristol, a reference to the above 100 handsome youths compelled to turn Turk, all English, and to John Goodale, an English Turk, Henry Chandler, a Chandler's son in Southwark, who had adopted the name of Ramadan Rise, Richard Clark, who had changed his name to Jafar, George Cook, who had become Ramadan, John Brown, who had become Mehmet, and William Winter, who had become Mustafa. A year earlier, in 1621, William Iser, 12 years old, had been captured by the Barbary corsairs and converted to Islam. In 1622, Thomas Herb, 9 years old, was captured in the English Channel, and in 1623, Andrew Williams, 7 years old, was captured too. None of these children returned to England. In May 1625, there was a report of English and Flemish renegados. In 1626, Francis Barnley, a pilot of a Tunisian ship, and Robert Lockyer of Plymouth, who had changed his name to Brahan, i.e. Ibrahim, and was known as the English Mami, were captured by the Spaniards. Each had been a courtier captain among the Algerians. In 1630, John Harrison reported about an English renegado in Sally, and in 1631 about a renegado of Dartmouth. Writing about the Moroccan ruler Abdul Malik in 1633, Harrison mentioned the latter had caused some English boys perforce to turn Moors. Harrison later added that Abdul Malik's successor had forcibly converted 8 Englishmen to Islam. In 1635, 2 Scotsmen were captured by Spaniards in Turkish vessel and were detained because they were renegados, i.e. they become Muslims. A year later, 2 Turkish pirates, Mohammed and Hamid, who were captured in the English Channel, reported that they had sailed a Sally ship with 5 renegados, one of whom was English. In 1638, Robert Blake brought on his ship 3 renegados and later met an Irish renegado. When it says renegado, it means Muslims, who was a captain of a Sally ship. And it goes on and it goes on. I mean, we are talking about people from the 15 and 1600s who were converted to Islam. Now, in some of these cases, it says they were forcibly converted. Now, we don't know if they were really forcibly converted or if they just converted because they liked Islam. There are records, a lot of these people, they converted to Islam because they actually liked Islam. And it also, I mean, why would they stay Muslim if they actually didn't like Islam? It wouldn't make sense, especially when they were returned to English hands, you know, or even other European hands. Why wouldn't they? The fact that these people kept their faith indicates that they actually believed in Islam. So this is people from the 16th and 17th century, English, also other Europeans I mentioned here, who become Muslims. So Islam is not a new religion to these shores. Islam has been here for a very long time. And, you know, these people were Englishmen as well. These were not people from another parts of the world who had a different culture, different way of living. These were Englishmen. And of course, some of them did return back to the UK and return to their families and have children. And this is bound to have had an influence upon this country and the development of the culture and society within this country. Later on, people may have forgotten the more religious Muslim aspects, but it still would have had an influence. Anyway, I will leave that there today. If you're interested in the book is Islam in Britain, 1558 to 1685 by Nabil Maher by Cambridge University Press. I think it's out of print at the moment, but it may still be possible to get a second-hand copy from somewhere because it was first published in 1998. But excellent book, well worth reading if you're interested in these things. So I will leave it there. I'll be back on Monday, inshallah, for my weekly sohbet. Until then, I wish you all a very good evening if you're in the UK. And wherever you are, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. May the peace and blessings of God be with you all. Thank you again for tuning in to my YouTube and Instagram channels. It's much appreciated, all of your support. You're wonderful. And if you have any questions that you would like me to answer, please don't hesitate to put them in the comments on these videos, or you can inbox me and I will get back to you and maybe include your questions in future videos. Okay, until next time, bye-bye, take care.